You're listening to Bigger Than Belief, real stories about real faith with real people whose belief is unbelievable. I'm your host, Adam Duxter. Thanks for listening to Bigger Than Belief. Today is Thursday, April 23rd, and today we're spotlighting a faith we've really yet to hear from on the show, and maybe for you, this is a faith you know nothing about. And if that's the case, you might not be alone, because the Baha'i faith is one of the world's newest, established less than 200 years ago. It's also one of the fastest growing faiths in the world, and currently, especially given the situation in Iran, one of the most persecuted. Baha'i faith leaders say nearly 200 Baha'is have been executed since the start of the current Iranian regime in the late 1970s. And they say right now, dozens upon dozens of Baha'is are in prison in Iran. On this week's episode, we're going to sit down with a Baha'i senior representative who joined us remotely from Washington, D.C. He is going to share a background on the faith, a bit of a history lesson, if you will. And then he's going to walk through what folks are seeing right now in Iran. We end the conversation talking about what keeps Baha'is in Iran and around the world believing despite the current persecution they face. So now, here is Anthony Vance. We now welcome on a very special guest zooming in from outside of Washington, D.C. It is Anthony Vance, the Senior Representative of Public Affairs for the Baha'is of the U.S. Anthony, we were just chatting a moment ago. There seemingly is new news for people of the Baha'i faith coming out of Iran every single day, it almost feels like. But I'm curious, if you had to characterize the last few months in a word or two, I mean, how would you?
Well, it's been a period of time of repeated convulsions in Iran, starting, one could say, with the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, followed in January by, that was in June, of course, and then followed in January by the protests, that massive protests that took place, where there are estimates that anywhere between 30 and 40,000 people may have been killed by the government on the streets of Iran. And then, of course, the most recent conflict, which is in a period of ceasefire, but we'll see if that holds. It's truly been tumultuous. And for certainly for vulnerable groups within Iran, there have been periods of time where the government has attempted to scapegoat them for the difficulties that the regime has faced in defending its citizens and maintaining a peaceful environment.
Mm. It,
Certainly, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, I mean, we had on a guest a few weeks back. We're taping this April 9th. We had a guest on a few weeks back who was from Iran and grew up and was part of the Baha'i faith and faced persecution as a child. Because of that, his family faced persecution, ultimately came to the United States, fled out of Iran. For many people, though, I feel like living in America, maybe they're not familiar with what the Baha'i faith is, what it means to be Baha'i. I mean, what's the quick history lesson, the background? I'm sure it's something you've explained to people time and time again.
Sure. The Baha'i faith began in Iran in the middle of the 19th century. Um, its main teachings center around the oneness of the human race. That is, that all people, regardless of their race, class, nationality, or religious background, are part of one human family, and that this needs to be reflected in the way that we treat each other, as well as ultimately in the way that the world is organized over time. And that among the teachings that support this concept of the oneness of the human race, among the most important is the oneness of religion. That is, that from a Baha'i perspective, God has sent messengers or prophets or the founders of the great religions to the human race or to various parts of the human race over its history, each with a revelation that's suited to the needs of the time and the capacity of the people to understand. So the founders of the great religions of the world, such as Judaism, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, the Baha'i faith, Islam, and in the Christianity, Islam, and then in the 19th century, the Baha'i faith, that all the founders of these great religions were all messengers of God. And as I said before, each bringing a revelation or a set of teachings, and also a mysterious spiritual power that inspires individuals towards a higher and better life and towards sacrifice for the common good. Um, and that these teachings are suited again to towards the needs of the time and the capacity of the people to understand. So, among the teachings for this age, Baha'is believe in the harmony of science and religion, that men and women should have equal rights and opportunities, that education should be universal, that everybody needs to be educated to the point where they can earn a living in a particular field, that a universal auxiliary language would be useful for a variety of reasons, one of which is to promote unity amongst people. um, and there are other social teachings that are designed like those to create harmony amongst the peoples of the world. And of course, we have some very basic teachings about the nature of the human soul, the need to pray every day, to read holy writings for the Baha'is. Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, who lived from 1817 to 1892, brought an enormous number of writings that Baha'is utilize regularly to build their own personal spiritual life and to guide them in their everyday life and interactions with people in society.
Mm.
So we're very optimistic about the long-term future of the world, despite the fact that there are some very serious obstacles facing us in the near term. But our vision is one of a united world in which all people regard themselves as citizens of the planet, just as our astronauts most recently reflected upon in their visit around the moon. I think that kind of perspective is highly constructive in today's world.
W- What is the relationship with Iran? I mean, because it feels like there is obviously a clear connection between Iran and the Baha'i faith. I know that it's where the majority or a large portion of adherents to the Baha'i faith live. Right? Is in that region of the world. I mean, what is the connection between your faith in that place?
Yes, yes. There's a very strong connection. The Baha'i faith originated in Iran. The forerunner of Baha'u'llah, who was also a prophet of God. Baha'u'llah, by the way, means the glory of God. It's a title. His given name at birth was Hussein Ali, and his predecessor had the title the Bab, which means the gate, and his given name was Ali Muhammad. The Bab proclaimed his mission in 1844 and attracted a fair number of clergy, but the vast majority of the clergy and individuals in society opposed his message. And from about 1847 to 1855, there were approximately 10,000, at least 10,000 of his followers who were killed in Iran. Both the clergy, the majority of the clergy, and the state arose against him. Um, Baha'u'llah was one of his followers and was exiled from Iran to various parts of the Ottoman Empire, first to Baghdad, then to Istanbul, then to Edirne in the European part of Turkey, and finally to what is today what is today Israel, and at that time in 1868, when he arrived there, was Palestine, a part of the Ottoman Empire. Baha'u'llah passed away there in 1892, and since 1868, since his arrival there, the Baha'i World Center has been located, starting, of course, in a very modest setting. He was a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire, but eventually the development of the Baha'i World Center took place in what is today Israel, beginning about 80 years before the state of Israel was established. Um, so there is there has been persecution of Baha'is on and off since the 1850s in Iran, and but it was sporadic until 1979 when the revolution took place in Iran. Then persecution became the official policy of the government. And so from 1979 until 1998, there were over 200 Baha'is who were executed by the government of Iran. Thousands were put in prison, many of them tortured and pressured to recant their faith. Um, we have seen a resurgence of this kind of persecution, uh, such that there have been about 200 Baha'is who've been executed since 1979. And there have been waves of persecution depending on what has been happening in the exterior environment of Iran to some extent. When the government feels under pressure, it turns to minority groups, the Baha'is in particular, to vent its frustrations and to blame, to scapegoat that group for the difficulties that it faces. So, for example, last summer, during the 12-day war in June, the government decided to arrest roughly about 700 people arbitrarily, 20 of whom were Baha'is, and the 700 were from the general population. But when one looks at the number of Baha'is relative to the general population, there are about 300,000 Baha'is in Iran and about 93 million Iranians. You can see quickly that the number of arrests of Baha'is was about 8 times that of the number of arrests per capita in the general population. And then again, during the protests in January, the authorities began to arrest Baha'is simply on the basis of continuing this policy of scapegoating.
Mm.
There was even a report issued in July and released publicly by the Ministry of Intelligence that claimed that Baha'is were making all sorts of communications with Israel during the 12-day war. And, all of these kinds of false allegations are utilized to justify persecution because fundamentally the government rejects the concept that there could possibly be a legitimate religion arising after Islam. And yet at the same time, many Iranians, especially when they're given freedom to actually explore independently religious truth, are very much attracted to the Baha'i faith.
Mm.
Today, there are about 6 to 8 million Baha'is in the world. Most are not Iranians. Most the Baha'i religion, the constituents of the Baha'i faith, reflect very much the global population, and the faith is established in in over 170 countries in which there are enough Baha'is to actually form Baha'i institutions.
What do you think more Americans don't know about this? I know I'd seen in some of your folks, with the organization sent over as well, but there have been a couple of incidents that have garnered large social media attention in specifics to a couple of people of Baha'i faith in Iran who have faced, torture and what have you. And some of that has garnered some large social media attention with some celebrity attention here in the United States where folks are posting about it. But what do you think has kept folks in the United States from knowing this faith, but also knowing this situation that's going on overseas?
Yes, we're of course there are a lot of things competing for in the news. Many many of them really quite heartbreaking that have nothing to do with the situation of the Baha'is in Iran. So there's always a variety of distractions. But actually, the Baha'i faith is much better known today than it was, for example, in 1979 when the revolution broke out. I can recall, I was a graduate student at the time, and the typical person on the street would not have heard anything about the Baha'i faith, but by 1983, um, there had been several dozen Baha'is executed in Iran. Newspapers in the United States were covering the Baha'i faith extensively. Um, and we went from a situation where no one had heard of it to one where in 1983, for example, President Reagan made a public statement in defense of the Baha'is in Iran, urging the government not to execute a whole set of Baha'is who were slated to be executed at that time. This was the summer of 1983. So, for a period of time, we went to a situation where the Baha'i faith was quite obscure, to one in which you could talk to any person who read newspapers, and it was very likely that they had heard of it. Um, but you're right in that generations succeed one another, and memories fade, and so it's situations like the one today that begin to bring more attention to the Baha'i faith and the challenges that it faces in Iran today.
Mm. How do you see this moving forward? I mean, you had said even it feels like there has been a surge in some of what you're seeing as recently as these past few days. Obviously, no one has a crystal ball, so to speak, but you've been studying this and you're familiar with this. I mean, what is realistic as far as the next step, or what is the hope for what could happen next?
Well, we're very much hoping that a set of a set of circumstances will arise such that religious freedom becomes commonplace in Iran rather than the opposite, and that the threats to the Baha'i community are relieved, and the threats to other communities in Iran, for example, Christian converts are very much under pressure in Iran, and there are other groups that are under pressure from the government. Certainly, 2 days ago, the head of Iran's judiciary made a statement that was published by Voice of America in which he urged more prosecutions and more use of the death penalty and confiscation of property, which we believe, of course, is the opposite of what should be occurring. Um, and so we're very hopeful that that his statement will not result in an increase in executions. Currently, we have two individuals in prison in Kerman who, um, one was coerced into a false confession on television on February 1st. His name is not his last name is Naimi, and his first name is Payvand. He thus far the government has not moved to execute him. The confession, which was entirely false, was that he was involved in organizing violence during demonstrations on February 8th in Kerman. He has a cousin named Borna who has also been tortured in prison and who signed a false confession indicating that he and Payvand were perpetrators of another crime in Iran, and totally false, and yet uh, enough from the perspective of the government of Iran to place them in serious jeopardy. So we're hoping that these two individuals will be freed, and that certainly that the government will not pursue in the term their execution or some other very serious penalty. Um, we currently have about 57 Baha'is in prison in Iran, and they are, of course, at risk. We're very much hoping that they will be released and that the government will recognize the fact that they've been innocent of any of the kinds of accusations that have been leveled against them. Many of them, in fact, most of them have not even had charges brought against them, as far as we can tell. Um, Over time, we see, the dangers, the immediate dangers to these individuals is just the tip of the iceberg. If the government chooses to go in a direction of severe scapegoating that it has pursued in the past. But if they were to do it this time along around with such severe trials that the country has gone through recently, it may feel justified to expanding the kind of punishment from its perspective that it meets out to those that it does not see as in agreement with its religious views and philosophy of governance.
Hmm.
So at this time, we're very concerned and we're very much seeking the support of governments around the world and making sure that the situation is well publicized. And
Hmm.
I think you saw recently a very good video put together by Mark Ruffalo, Rainn Wilson, and Penn Badgley that described the situation faced by Pavand and his torture and the the confession that he was coerced into making on television on February 1st. And so we're hoping that that kind of publicity can also have an effect on global public opinion and on governments to arise and to make it clear to the Iranian government that this kind of behavior is not acceptable in the international sphere.
Hmm. Last thing I'm curious, I kind of want to know from you is, I mean, for this to have been going on for so long, right, in Iran, where there's persecution is just part of the game, or part of the deal, so to speak, for people of the Baha'i faith. What keeps people believing? What keeps you believing? Despite persecution, because I think for most people, say if it was a sports fandom they had in their life, and they'd say, "I really love this thing." But if push came to shove, they'd say, okay, I'll move on from it if it's, my health or my safety's at risk, right? What is it about people of the Baha'i faith where they are sticking with it or have stuck with it for this long, despite persecution, despite what's going on?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think fundamentally, people stick with it because they love Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, and they believe that he was the promised one of all of the great religions of the world. And that's the claim that he makes. And most Baha'is have become Baha'is because they've investigated his claims. They're not only subjective in nature, but he provides some objective evidence to support his claims. In fact, he provides quite a bit of objective evidence to support his claims. And so once one is convinced that he is who he said he was, and that is the promised one of all of the great religions of the world, and that's the first step. And the second is that he provides a vision as to where the world is going. Despite all of the difficulties that the world is facing, and these are large, but there have been other difficulties such as two world wars and literally hundreds of smaller wars across the world over the last century and a half. Um, there are some signs of progress. There are some signs that there is a greater consciousness of global responsibility. There are institutions that are regional and global in nature that have been created over the past 100 years. There is a growth in the Baha'i faith from a religion that only existed in Iran in the 19th century to the point where there are 6 to 8 million Baha'is across the world in over 180 countries. Um, and there is a sense that things are unfolding in a manner that is consistent with the vision that Baha'u'llah has for the building of a new society. And there are statements in the Baha'i writings about the difficulties that are going to be inevitable in the decay of some of the habits and patterns of conduct that typify the world in which we live in today. By that I mean extreme nationalism, racism, um, extreme religious prejudice. These are some of the things that are the negative aspects of the society, the global society in which we live. Discrimination against women. All of these things are negative things that are gradually being overcome. But occasionally, with these dying gasps, as we see in Iran, with religious prejudice being at the forefront, there are a lot of things that are occurring that suggest that the pattern of consciousness within the global society is going in the opposite direction. And certainly the kinds of treaties that have been developed between nations regarding individual rights and freedoms, whether we're talking about the Declaration of Human Rights or the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, all of these things are aspirational for many parts of the world, but they're there and they didn't exist 100 years ago. And we see these and the development of international institutions as the preliminary building blocks towards a new society.
Anthony, I appreciate you taking time in coming and sharing with us. I do think, like you said, it is a matter of education and people understanding what's going on and learning from people who are going through it and have lived it. Lastly, I mean, how can people find more, learn more? I mean, how would you direct people to if they say, I want to learn more about what's going on or just learn more about the Baha'i faith?
Well, there's a website, Baha'i.us, that a person can go to and get information on how to contact Baha'is in their own area. I think that's probably the best first step. Also, one can read introductory Baha'i books like Baha'u'llah in the New Era, which is available on Amazon, or All Things Made New, which is also available on Amazon. So Baha'is are certainly not trying to keep themselves hidden in the United States, and we're very happy to share whatever it is people are interested in learning about in terms of our faith.
Anthony, thank you for your time. I appreciate it greatly.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much for taking time to listen to Bigger Than Belief. Seriously, from the bottom of my heart, it has been awesome to watch what we've been able to do in just about 4 months' time. Some of the numbers we've gotten back have been awesome. Didn't really plan on sharing this at first, but we've had over 15,000 people play an episode of Bigger Than Belief at some point, and we've had hundreds of thousands of people check us out online and on social media, and that means so much. And so if you're new here, just know we do this every single week. Real stories about real faith and real people. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate this podcast 5 stars wherever you're listening to it right now, because seriously, that makes such a difference for us. So if you have 2 seconds, please just go in that app, click 5 stars, even if you've been listening for a while and it's like, hey, I just haven't done that yet. And please also, if you can, if you have the time, drop a review for us in the app if you rate us 5 stars, because all of this just helps us play to the algorithm and helps us be seen by even more people. We've got some really cool episodes in the work that I am really excited to show you all and to share with you all. And one of those airs just this next Thursday. In the meantime, though, folks, again, thank you so much for giving us part of your day. Enjoy your life, enjoy your week, and we will be back next week on Thursday. We'll see you then.
Love podcasts? Love Minnesota?
Check out the WCCO podcast studio lineup.
Hear the top stories of the day with 4 things to know.
Discover top female athletes and teams from around the state on women in sports.
Dive into stories about faith and belief, from your local leaders to your neighbors next door, with Bigger Than Belief.
Stay in the know on the go with the WCCO podcast studio. Go to WCCO.com/podcasts.